The morning sun cast long shadows across the Royal Guard training facility as Marcus Wellington adjusted his standard-issue rifle for the third time. Around him, the other guards were already settling into their firing positions, their conversations filled with the usual mixture of bravado and friendly competition. "Look at Wellington fumbling with his weapon again," chuckled Sergeant Davies, a thick-set man with 20 years of palace guard service under his belt. "You'd think after 6 months he'd have figured out how to hold a rifle properly." The other guards snickered as Marcus continued his methodical preparation. He had heard these comments every day since joining the Royal Guard unit 6 months ago. To them, he was just another recruit who had somehow passed the basic requirements but clearly lacked the natural talent for marksmanship that separated the wheat from the chaff. "Maybe we should start him on a BB gun first," suggested Corporal Jenkins, earning another round of laughter from the group. "Work his way up to the real thing." Marcus said nothing. He had learned long ago that responding to mockery often made things worse. Instead, he focused on his breathing, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle in his hands. The weapon felt different from what he was used to, lighter and less precise, but it would have to do. The Royal Guard shooting range was impressive by most standards. Targets stretched out to 800 meters with electronic scoring systems and state-of-the-art equipment. For the palace guards, this represented the pinnacle of marksmanship training. They were, after all, responsible for protecting the most important people in the kingdom. "Attention, guards," barked Captain Morrison as he strode onto the range. "Today's qualification shoot will determine next month's duty assignments. Top performers get close protection detail. Bottom performers get gate duty." The distinction mattered. Close protection meant working directly with the royal family, accompanying them to events and being part of the elite inner circle. Gate duty meant standing at entrance points for 12-hour shifts, checking identification and dealing with tourists. Marcus had been on gate duty for his entire 6 months of service. The other guards assumed it was because of his poor shooting performance, though none of them had actually seen him shoot. The truth was more complicated. "Wellington," Captain Morrison's voice cut through the morning air. "You're up first today? Let's see if you've improved since your last disaster." The other guards exchanged knowing glances. Marcus's last qualification had been legendarily bad, according to the stories that circulated. Nobody talked about specific scores, but the implication was clear. He had barely passed. Marcus approached the firing line with steady steps. The target was set at 200 meters, standard distance for Palace Guard qualification. He could hear whispered comments behind him. "£10 says he doesn't even hit the target," someone muttered. "I'll take that bet," replied another voice. "He'll hit it, but probably in the outer rings." "Money says he pulls left like always," added a third voice. Marcus settled into position, adjusting his stance slightly. The rifle felt awkward in his hands, not because he didn't know how to use it, but because it lacked the precision instruments he was accustomed to. No advanced scope, no wind measurement tools, no rangefinder. Just basic iron sights and his own judgment. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering different ranges, different weapons, different circumstances. Places where missing the target wasn't just embarrassing, it was fatal. Where the distance wasn't 200 meters, but 1,200 or even 1,800, where the wind wasn't. Just a minor inconvenience, but a critical factor that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Any time today?" "Wellington," called Captain Morrison impatiently. Marcus opened his eyes and focused on the target. Through the iron sights, he could see the black circle clearly. His breathing slowed automatically, falling into the rhythm that had been drilled into him over years of training in places these guards had never heard of. The first shot rang out across the range. "Complete miss," announced the range officer immediately, checking his electronic display. No impact registered. The guards behind Marcus erupted in barely contained laughter. This was even worse than they had expected. "Told you he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn," chuckled Davies. "That's what happens when you rush recruitment," added Jenkins. "Standards keep dropping." Marcus frowned slightly, checking his rifle. The sights were off, which explained the miss. He made a quick adjustment and settled back into position. The second shot produced another immediate announcement. Miss! Still no impact on target. Now the laughter was open and loud. Even Captain Morrison was shaking his head in disgust. Wellington, are you even aiming at the right target? The captain called out. Because at this rate, you're going to set a new record for worst performance. Marcus ignored the comments and focused on his weapon. The sights were still not properly aligned. These training rifles were clearly not maintained to the standards he was used to. He made another adjustment, larger this time. Third time's the charm, Wellington? Someone called out behind him. More like third time's the disaster, replied another voice. Marcus settled into position for his third shot. This time he took longer to aim, compensating not just for the faulty sights but for the crosswind that the other guards seemed to ignore completely. In his peripheral vision, he noticed that none of them were accounting for environmental factors at all. They were treating this like a carnival shooting gallery rather than a precision marksmanship exercise. The third shot echoed across the range. Miss again, announced the range officer. That's 3 misses for Wellington. Captain, should we continue with this? Captain Morrison looked disgusted. Give him his 10 shots. Regulations require it. But this is pathetic even by his standards. The mockery continued as Marcus fired his remaining 7 shots. Each one was announced as a miss or an outer ring hit. By the time he finished, the other guards were openly laughing and making jokes about recommending him for transfer to the kitchen staff. Well? Wellington, said Captain Morrison as Marcus stepped back from the firing line. That might be the worst performance I've ever witnessed. 3 months of gate duty for you. Maybe by then you'll have figured out which end of the rifle the bullets come from. The other guards took their turns, each one scoring respectably. Davies managed a 7 out of 10 in the inner rings. Jenkins scored 8 out of 10. Even the newest recruit besides Marcus managed 6 out of 10 inches C. Wellington, called out Davies after completing his round. That's how it's done. Maybe you should watch more carefully next time. Or maybe find a different career, added Jenkins. I hear the post office is hiring. Marcus collected his gear in silence while the others continued their shooting. He had 3 months of gate duty ahead of him, which suited his purposes perfectly. Gate duty meant routine, predictable schedules, and most importantly, no close scrutiny of his activities during off-duty hours. As he walked back toward the guard barracks, Marcus reflected on the morning's performance. The other guards thought they had witnessed incompetence, but the reality was far more complex. Every missed shot had been precisely placed exactly where he intended in the dirt berm behind the target. In a tight grouping that would have impressed any professional marksman, the art wasn't in hitting the target. Any reasonably trained person could hit a stationary target at 200 meters. The art was in missing it convincingly while maintaining the muscle memory and skills that had taken years to develop in far more challenging circumstances. That afternoon, Marcus reported to Gate Station 7, the eastern entrance to the palace grounds. It was considered the least prestigious assignment, handling mostly service deliveries and staff entrances. The other guard on duty, a veteran named Thompson, greeted him with sympathy. Heard about your shooting performance this morning, Thompson said with a shake of his head. Don't let it get to you. Not everyone's cut out for the sharpshooting end of things. I suppose not, Marcus replied, settling into his chair at the guard station. Been doing this job for 15 years, Thompson continued. Seen all kinds come through. Some are natural marksmen, others are better at the people side of things. Maybe you'll find your niche in crowd management or administrative duties. Marcus nodded politely while reviewing the day's schedule of expected deliveries and appointments. Gate duty was actually quite demanding in its own way. It required attention to detail, good judgment about people, and the ability to spot potential threats among dozens of legitimate visitors. The first few hours passed routinely. Delivery trucks, staff members, and official visitors all presented their credentials and were processed according to protocol. Marcus found himself studying each person carefully, noting details that his training had taught him to observe. Body language, eye movement, nervous habits, concealed objects, all the subtle signs that separated legitimate visitors from potential threats. Around mid-afternoon, a black sedan approached the gate. The driver was dressed in a business suit and presented official credentials identifying him as a liaison from the Ministry of Defense. Purpose of visit? Marcus asked, examining the identification carefully. Routine security briefing with Captain Morrison, the man replied. Should be on your schedule. Marcus checked his list but found no such appointment. Thompson, who was handling. The investigation began 3 days later. Marcus was summoned to Captain Morrison's office at 08:00 hours sharp, where he found not only the captain, but also 2 men in civilian clothes who introduced themselves as investigators from internal security. The formal nature of the meeting made it clear that yesterday's shooting incident had raised more questions than it had answered. Sit down. Wellington, Captain Morrison said, his tone more serious than Marcus had ever heard it. These gentlemen have some questions about your background and yesterday's performance. The older of the 2 investigators, a thin man with sharp eyes who had introduced himself as Director Hayes, opened a thick file folder. Marcus Wellington, age 28, recruited to the Royal Guard 6 months ago from civilian life. Previous employment as a warehouse security guard in Birmingham. No military service, no advanced weapons training, no record of competitive shooting. He looked up from the file with a puzzled expression. And yet yesterday you made a shot that our ballistics experts describe as exceptionally professional under circumstances that would challenge experienced military snipers. Marcus maintained steady eye contact. I suppose I was fortunate, sir. Fortunate, repeated the second investigator, a younger man named Collins. A 300-meter shot on a moving target, compensating for crosswinds with perfect placement to disable but not kill. That's not fortune, Wellington. That's advanced training. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Marcus could feel all 3 men studying his reaction, looking for any sign that would reveal more than he was willing to share. Sometimes people rise to the occasion during emergencies, Marcus said carefully. Adrenaline can do remarkable things. Director Hayes leaned back in his chair, clearly unconvinced. We've reviewed your qualification scores from the past 6 months. Consistently poor performance, multiple failures to hit targets at basic distances. Yet our ballistics analysis of yesterday's shot shows precision that suggests years of professional training. Perhaps, suggested Captain Morrison, we should have Wellington demonstrate his shooting under controlled conditions. If yesterday was truly exceptional performance under pressure, he should be able to replicate it. Marcus felt his pulse quicken slightly. A controlled demonstration would make it much harder to maintain his cover story. But refusing would raise even more suspicions. I'd be happy to try, he said. Though I can't guarantee I'll perform as well as yesterday. Like I said, emergency situations seem to bring out something different in me. An hour later, the group assembled at the expanded range facility that was normally reserved for advanced training. Unlike the standard 200-meter range where Marcus had failed his qualifications, this facility extended to 1,000 meters and included sophisticated monitoring equipment. Word had spread among the guards that Wellington was being given a special shooting test. Despite the early hour, nearly 24 off-duty personnel had gathered to watch what many expected would be a spectacular failure. This should be entertaining, Davies muttered to Jenkins as they found positions in the observation area. Wellington's about to show everyone that yesterday was pure luck. My money says he can't even hit the target at 300 meters, Jenkins replied. Yesterday was a fluke. Probably ricochet off something that happened to hit the car. Director Hayes supervised the setup personally. We'll start at 300 meters, the same distance as yesterday's shot. Static target, no wind conditions to speak of. Should be much easier than what you faced during the emergency. Marcus accepted the rifle, the same model he had used during the crisis. Unlike the poorly maintained training weapons, this rifle was in excellent condition with properly calibrated sights. As he examined the weapon, he noticed several of the guards exchanging knowing glances. "Take your time," Captain Morrison said. "No pressure." But there was pressure, and everyone present knew it. This test would either confirm that yesterday had been an incredible stroke of luck, or it would prove that Marcus had capabilities he had been hiding. There was no middle ground. Marcus approached the firing position with the same deliberate movements he had displayed during his failed qualifications. But this time, his preparation was slightly different. Instead of the fumbling adjustments that had characterized his previous range sessions, his movements were efficient and precise through the scope. The target looked absurdly large and close compared to the challenges he was accustomed to. No movement, no environmental complications, no life-or-death consequences. It was almost insultingly simple. He took a breath, held it, and fired. "Perfect center hit," announced the range officer immediately. A murmur went through the watching guards. One good shot could still be explained as luck, but the precision of the placement was noteworthy. "Again," Director Hayes said simply. Marcus fired a second shot. Another perfect center hit, less than an inch from the first. "Lucky streak," Davies whispered, though his voice carried less confidence than before. "Third shot," Director Hayes requested. This time Marcus deliberately placed his shot slightly off-center, in the inner ring but not bullseye. It was still an excellent shot by any standard, but it maintained some element of inconsistency that might support the adrenaline theory. "Interesting," Collins observed, making notes. "Two perfect shots, then a slight miss. That's more consistent with someone operating at the edge of their capabilities." Director Hayes wasn't satisfied. "Let's try 500 meters. At 500 meters, the target was barely visible to the naked eye. This was the distance that separated competent marksmen from truly exceptional ones. Marcus knew that success at this range would be almost impossible to explain away as luck or adrenaline, but failure would compromise his ability to perform his real duties. If a genuine crisis arose, he decided on a middle course. He would demonstrate competence but not perfection. Good enough to be plausible, not so good as to be impossible. The first shot at 500 meters hit the outer ring of the target. Respectable for a guard, but not exceptional. "Not bad," Captain Morrison said with some surprise. "That's better than most of my men could do at that distance." The second shot hit the inner ring. The third shot missed the target entirely, though it was a deliberately controlled miss that landed in a predictable location. "More consistent with yesterday's performance," Director Hayes observed. "Capable but inconsistent. The crisis situation may have indeed produced temporarily enhanced performance." Marcus felt a small sense of relief. The demonstration had been successful in maintaining the balance between competence and concealment. He had shown enough skill to make yesterday's shot plausible, without revealing the full extent of his capabilities, but as he prepared to leave the range, Director Hayes made an unexpected announcement. "One more test. Moving target at 400 meters. A mechanical target system activated, sending a man-sized silhouette moving laterally across the range at walking speed." This was the type of challenge that separated professional military snipers from civilian marksmen. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. The watching guards were now completely silent. Understanding that this test would definitively answer questions about his true abilities, he studied the moving target through his scope, calculating lead time, wind drift, and the mechanical timing of the target system. In his peripheral vision, he could see Director Hayes watching him closely, looking for any sign of the analytical process that professional snipers used for such shots. Marcus deliberately took longer than necessary to aim, making it appear that he was struggling with the calculations. He fired and missed, the shot landing behind the target in a way that suggested he had failed to lead properly. "Try again," Director Hayes said. The second shot was closer but still a miss, this time leading too much. Marcus was performing the role of someone learning through trial and error. Rather than applying established expertise, the third shot hit the target in the shoulder area. Not a perfect hit, but sufficient to stop a threat. "Acceptable performance," Collins concluded, closing his notebook. Demonstrates capacity for improvement under pressure but lacks the consistency of professional training. As the group prepared to leave the range, Marcus overheard Davies talking to Jenkins. "I still don't understand how he made that shot yesterday," Davies said, shaking his head. "This performance is more like what I'd expect from him." "People do strange things under pressure," Jenkins replied. Maybe he really did have a moment of exceptional clarity. That afternoon, Marcus returned to his gate duty assignment, though he noticed increased scrutiny from other security personnel. The investigation had raised his profile within the guard unit, and he could feel curious glances throughout the day. Around mid-afternoon, Thompson approached him with an unusual request. "Wellington, I've got a situation that requires 2 guards, and everyone else is tied up with the investigation follow-up. You willing to handle a special assignment?" Marcus looked up from the visitor log he had been reviewing. "What kind of assignment?" "VIP escort duty. Foreign diplomat needs transport from his hotel to a private meeting at the palace. Normally we'd assign this to someone from close protection, but they're all busy with the security review." The assignment was exactly the type of duty that Marcus had been hoping to avoid. Close proximity to high-value individuals increased the risk of recognition by someone who... The secure briefing room was located 3 levels beneath the palace, in a section that didn't appear on any public architectural plans. Marcus had never seen this part of the complex during his 6 months of gate duty, but he recognized the type of facility immediately. Reinforced walls, electronic countermeasures, and the kind of serious security that surrounded the most classified government operations. Colonel Richardson activated a recording device and placed a thick file on the conference table. Director Hayes sat opposite Marcus, while Captain Morrison remained standing near the door, clearly still processing the revelation that one of his guards had been operating under false identity. "Before we begin," Colonel Richardson said, "I want to establish that this conversation is classified at the highest levels. Captain Morrison has been granted temporary clearance for this briefing, but nothing discussed in this room goes beyond these 4 walls." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. Whatever was revealed here would have consequences far beyond his own situation. "Now then," Richardson continued, opening the file, "let's start with your real name." Marcus took a breath, knowing that once he began telling the truth, there would be no going back to his carefully constructed cover story. "Sergeant Major Marcus Webb, 22nd Special Air Service Regiment." The reaction was immediate. Captain Morrison's eyes widened in recognition of one of the most elite military units in the world. Director Hayes leaned forward with increased interest. Even Colonel Richardson, who had clearly suspected something like this, showed surprise at the specific unit. 22nd SAS, Richardson repeated. "That would make you one of the most highly trained soldiers in the British military. Counterterrorism, deep reconnaissance, precision marksmanship, among other things," Marcus confirmed. "And you've been operating under false identity as a bumbling palace guard for 6 months, Hayes said. "Still trying to process the scope of the deception. Why?" Marcus looked around the room at the 3 men who now knew his secret. "Because someone inside the palace security system has been selling information to hostile foreign actors. And the only way to identify them was from the inside, without them knowing they were being investigated." The room fell silent. Captain Morrison slowly sat down, the implications hitting him immediately. "One of my people is a traitor," he said quietly. "We believe so," Marcus confirmed. "Over the past 18 months, there have been 7 security breaches involving royal family movements, diplomatic visits, and classified meetings. Each breach involved information that could only have come from someone with inside access to palace security operations." Colonel Richardson pulled out additional documents. "The terrorist attack you stopped last week wasn't random. The attacker knew exactly when the mobile security units would be responding to a false alarm on the other side of the complex. He knew which gate would be most vulnerable and at what time. The kidnapping attempt yesterday was even more specific," Director Hayes added. "Dr. Hassan's route, timing, and security arrangements were known to the attackers. They were prepared to intercept him at the exact location where his vehicle would be most vulnerable. Marcus nodded grimly. Both incidents were only possible because someone inside provided detailed intelligence to hostile actors. Captain Morrison looked devastated. I've served with these men for years. I can't believe any of them would. That's exactly why we needed an outsider, Marcus explained. Someone who could observe without being suspected, gather evidence without raising alarms, and identify the source of the leaks. And your terrible shooting performance? Richardson asked. Necessary camouflage. If I had demonstrated my real capabilities from the beginning, I would have been promoted to close protection duty immediately. That would have limited my access to information and made me a threat to whoever was providing intelligence to hostile actors. Marcus paused, remembering the months of deliberate failure and mockery he had endured. By appearing incompetent, I was assigned to gate duty where I could observe everyone coming and going, monitor communications, and identify patterns in security breaches. Brilliant, Hayes admitted grudgingly. Frustrating that you couldn't share this with us sooner, but brilliant nonetheless. So what have you discovered? Captain Morrison asked. Though his expression suggested he dreaded the answer, Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a small electronic device. This is a recording device I've been carrying for the past 6 months. It's captured hundreds of hours of conversations, radio transmissions, and observations. He placed the device on the table. 3 days ago, after the terrorist attack, I recorded a conversation between Sergeant Davies and an unknown individual discussing the failure of the operation and the unexpected interference. The color drained from Captain Morrison's face. Davies? Robert Davies? I'm afraid so. The conversation took place in the guard locker room after hours. Davies was reporting to someone he called Control about the terrorist attack failure and specifically mentioned that an unknown guard had made an impossible shot that disrupted their operation. Marcus activated the recording device. Davies' voice filled the secure briefing room, clearly audible despite the background noise. The operation was perfect until one of the guards made a lucky shot, Davies' voice said. 300 meters on a moving target. Stopped the car cold just before it reached the main building. An unfamiliar voice responded, Which guard? Wellington. Marcus Wellington? He's been useless for 6 months. Can't hit anything during training. But somehow he made a shot that would challenge a professional sniper. This is a problem. If Wellington has capabilities we don't know about, he could compromise future operations. Davies' voice again. I don't think so. I've watched him shoot dozens of times. Yesterday was pure luck, but we should accelerate the timeline for the next operation. Agreed. The diplomatic reception next week provides the perfect opportunity. With the increased security presence, it will look like an external attack. The recording ended. The silence in the briefing room was complete. Captain Morrison put his head in his hands. 20 years I've served with Robert Davies. 20 years. He was at my wedding. I'm godfather to his youngest son. How long has this been going on? Richardson asked Marcus. Based on the conversations I've recorded and the pattern of security breaches, I believe Davies has been providing intelligence for at least 2 years. The operation appears to be sophisticated, with multiple handlers and careful operational security. Marcus pulled out additional materials from his jacket. I've also documented his financial situation. Despite his salary as a palace guard, Davies has been making regular cash deposits to his personal account. Always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger automatic investigation. Foreign money? Hayes asked. Almost certainly. The deposits coincide with major security breaches and successful intelligence gathering operations. Davies has been very well compensated for his treason. Colonel Richardson began making notes rapidly. What about this diplomatic reception he mentioned? Next Friday evening. The Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, and 12 foreign diplomats will be attending a private dinner at the palace. Close protection security will be provided by Davies' unit. The implications were staggering. If Davies was planning to facilitate an attack during such a high-profile event, The consequences could include the assassination of multiple world leaders. We need to arrest Davies immediately, Captain Morrison said. Reaching for his phone? No, Marcus said firmly. If we arrest Davies now, we lose the opportunity to roll up his entire network. We don't know who his handlers are, how many other agents they might have, or what other operations are planned. But we can't let him facilitate an attack on the diplomatic reception, Hayes protested. Marcus smiled slightly. We're not going to let him facilitate an attack. We're going to use him to facilitate the destruction of his entire network. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus outlined the plan that he had been developing for weeks, waiting for exactly this opportunity. Davies believes I'm an incompetent guard who got lucky. He has no idea that I've been recording his activities or that his network has been compromised. We can use his overconfidence against him. The plan was complex but elegant. Davies would be allowed to proceed with his preparations for the diplomatic reception attack, but every step would be monitored and controlled. His handlers would be identified through surveillance. The attack itself would be allowed to begin, then stopped at the last possible moment with devastating effectiveness. The key, Marcus explained, is that Davies and his handlers must believe everything is proceeding normally until the moment we spring the trap, and you'll be providing security for the reception? Richardson asked. Davies will ensure I'm assigned to the event. He wants me there because he believes I'm harmless. What he doesn't realize is that he's bringing one of the most dangerous snipers in the British military directly into the heart of his operation. Captain Morrison was still struggling with the betrayal of his longtime colleague. How did Davies hide this for so long? I never suspected anything. Professional training, Marcus replied. Davies isn't just a traitor, he's a trained intelligence operative. His bumbling, friendly persona is as much of a performance as my incompetent shooting.